समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Welcome to the Worldview with Swasti. Today we'll talk about a region much closer home and crucial to the great power contestation, which is the South China Sea and the region of ASEAN. Now, from India's perspective, it is a core component of India's Act East policy. We have historical linkages, we have a trade of about $130 billion bilateral, and so on. And we have several partners and also now defense partners there. Now, many developments have taken place lately. Dr. Jaishankar, our External Affairs Minister, was there a few days ago to attend the ASEAN summit, where he had a number of key bilaterals with his counterparts. India, as you know, has also sold its BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles to now 3 countries: the Philippines, Indonesia, and now Vietnam. Now, Philippines is in the ASEAN grouping and is also perhaps the most hawkish in China. It rejected Beijing's claim on the EEZ, etc. Others have chosen a path of hedging. However, today we are going to be discussing that in detail, getting into the length and breadth of why South China Sea has become a bit of a center for a lot of global activity right now. And to discuss that, I have Professor Victor Manhit, who's the director of Stratbase, a well-known think tank from Manila. Today he joins me from Manila, and concurrently he is the Philippine country head of BowerGroupAsia, a leading strategic advisory firm specializing in the Asia Pacific. His CV is quite illustrious. He was a former chair and retired associate professor of political science at the De La Salle University in Manila. He's also authored numerous commentaries and books and papers, and he's also a member of the Armed Forces of the Philippines Multi-Sector Governance Council and was appointed to be the chair of the Cybersecurity Committee. Dr. Manhit, what a pleasure to welcome you to Worldview with Swasti. Thanks for taking the time out.
Thank you for the invitation, and also, of course, nice to see you again.
It was just some weeks ago that we were discussing South China Sea in such great detail in Europe, and now we've connected, so discuss it again. So, all right, let's just start from the beginning. Of course, let's just start with what makes the South China Sea and the ASEAN so important. Why did the world all come together, for having that meeting in Manila just last week? Please, could you start with that?
Yes, of course, we have to credit our government that the way they have chaired ASEAN for 2026. They were successful in bringing together countries, no, from Europe, from South Asia, from North America to South America. The whole idea is maybe the foreign policy of our government, and the famous line of our president is friend to all, enemy to no one. No? So that is what we saw in the ASEAN gathering last week, and also the different bilaterals that happened among member ASEAN countries and visitors. But on one hand, also, if you look at geography and you speak of this future of world economy, the Indo-Pacific, we're actually in the middle of that geographically. It shows some strategic value to our archipelago, where a big portion of trade passes through. Everyone talks about the Taiwan Strait, everyone talks about the Malacca Strait, without realizing before you reach Malacca or Taiwan Strait, you will pass through the West Philippine Sea, broadly known as the South China Sea. And that has
Right,
become the
right.
key reasons why there's a lot of investment on the part of the Philippines with regards to other countries.
Right. So thanks for elaborating on that. You also mentioned the West Philippine Sea, which is known as the South China Sea, and I'm glad you sort of, fine tuned that semantic difference, because there is we understand that sensibility and where it comes from. I'd just like to, would you like to share it with us and with our audience how your work has been instrumental in calling China out for what China has been doing in your neighborhood and in your waters. And could you just run us through, that experience? Because I mean, I remember we had very lengthy conversations about it. In short, could you tell us about that a bit?
Yes. It's best to understand that the Philippines is not claiming South China Sea, but under international law, specifically the UNCLOS or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, there are some entitlements that was given to countries. And what we are just simply identifying is what we call the West Philippine Sea, that refers to our exclusive economic zone and our territorial seas. And that is what we are protecting, our maritime rights, and we define it as our own territorial integrity. And as our archipelago, as an archipelagic nation, we define it as part of our archipelagic sea lanes. No? So within that context, that's how we stood firm against China's aggressiveness back in 2012. They have done this decades in different instances, but in 2012, our government decided to stand firm that those rocks and shoals, we should not allow China to take it over. Because as they took it peacefully 3 decades ago in the 90s, now they've converted this into what you call air force bases or military bases. Now I'm referring to islands that used to be rocks and shoals in the Paracel Island or even the Spratly Islands. So our government decided to make a stand on it and filed a case against China. And that case we brought to arbitration based on international law, and we won that case 3 years after in 2016. So the Philippines decided to stand firm on that arbitral victory and build a coalition of countries that believe on a rules based order. It took us some time because we had a government that simply saw the weakness of the Philippines, never saw the potential of partnerships, never saw the potential of building more countries lining up, working with us in protecting the freedom of navigation. And now we have really elevated a lot of this engagement to strategic partnership. And one of them was India. I think last year our president visited India and signed a strategic partnership with India. And it reflects what the Philippines have done with other countries because we all share one thing: we are democracies and we believe in a rules based international order.
Right. Oh, well, I mean, that was a wonderful run up. Thank you, Professor Manhit, for that. You mentioned India. Of course, I'm going to come to our own strategic partnership. But before that, also help us understand where is ASEAN right now positioned when it comes to China. Of course, we know China keeps ASEAN divided. We know that the countries within ASEAN, which is a group of 10, countries, all I mean, different economies, different orientations, different also political experiences. Okay, but we know that for years China has tried to keep ASEAN divided, and yet there is this effort to come to a common code of conduct. Help us sort of walk through the developments. Where is it now? What is the utility? Will that ever happen? Why does China keep pushing for it? And what is the view? The variety within the view among the ASEAN countries, including your own.
Of course, with ASEAN, we are 10 countries with different national interests. And I think we have done well together, ensuring peace, stability in the region, and we've seen even the economy grow together, rising, hopefully, that by, as some would say, the fourth largest economy, if you would see ASEAN collectively, after the United States, EU, China, then ASEAN. But of course, as 10 countries, we have our own differing interests. We are the closest to China. So any aggression, any attempt by China to push back in terms of their maritime claims. Remember the nine dash line that was that was uh, that has evolved even the 10 dash line that reach parts of India. We have been in the forefront of that, and that became a challenge to the Philippines because ASEAN was not united in making a stand against China on this issue of the nine dash line and even the takeover of some rocks and shoals in the South China Sea that is within, again, based on international law, within the maritime territory or maritime exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. So that kind of context this unites us in ASEAN. But what binds us together, I think, is also the way we view that, number one, from a geopolitical point of view, there is an outlook called the Indo-Pacific region. So we see the value of the region beyond ASEAN, to South Asia, to East Asia, and to the broader uh, countries within the Pacific Ocean. But a lot of these ASEAN countries, their economy are quite tied up to China. That's why at times you fail to come up with strong position on the aggressiveness or even the illegal coercive activities of China among maritime nations. No? The Philippines have stood firm on that. You see some consistency on the position of Vietnam. They're the two closest in terms of maritime ASEAN to China. But again, that's expected. There is the desire, and I would emphasize for decades, to have a code of conduct. Again, driven by what? What drove ASEAN historically to this direction is the actions of China. Again, people have forgotten why the code of conduct was first discussed or was first the position of ASEAN as a whole, then hopefully ASEAN with China. It's been decades. But what makes it harder, I believe, from an independent point of view, is that we cannot sacrifice our own national interests. In the case of the Philippines, any code of conduct should reflect, and this is what the government tells us, the people of the Republic of the Philippines, that no code of conduct that will violate what we have won. Again, based on the entitlements, based on our UNCLOS arbitral award in 2016. So that for me makes it challenging. I think the rest of ASEAN is open for that. The question is, would China, uh, who does not give value to this arbitral award, even though the rest of the world, especially the rest of the world that passes through our seas, South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea, values this award. So that is the challenge, I think. And every year, every chair will always say they would like to settle this, they would like to have one. But me, I'm hoping that we should not rush this because we're chair, and because that means sacrificing also our own interests as a nation vis-a-vis what we have defined under our laws as our archipelagic sea lanes, our maritime zone. So that cannot go against our government, who will only be here until 2028, cannot simply disregard our internal laws based on our arbitral award and sign a code of conduct that violates that award.
Yeah, point well taken and point well made, Professor Manhit. But also, when we think of any security architecture in the Indo-Pacific, of course, Indo-Pacific is larger sort of context in which, of course, the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea is a subset, and it is so important for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And of course, it's become even more important now that we saw Hormuz getting weaponized, and everybody is now talking about what is going to be the shock to global economy if, God forbid, something were to go wrong here in this part of the region where tensions are really flying high and all that. Now, in this regard, whenever we think of articulating, when I say we, it is less to do with India. It is about, anybody, any actor, a set of countries that is wanting to have like an Indo-Pacific strategy, an Indo-Pacific security architecture. No Indo-Pacific security architecture can work without ASEAN centrality, because ASEAN is in the heart of it, right? And yet you have an ASEAN which is divided when it comes to the question of China. And here, could you also, help the viewers understand? Many of those may not be knowing the region so well. How the key countries, especially when we look at, let's say, a country like Indonesia, that also has its EEZ tussle with China, but has chosen to hedge its bets and chosen to sort of multi-align more than what Philippines has done. So how do we also understand this difference? I mean, we have a US tilt, we have a China tilt, and then we have those who are not really wanting to take sides there. So could you, I mean, from your perspective, help us understand this problem with ASEAN centrality?
Yes, so in our case, there's a misunderstanding that our tilt is either between China or the United States. Our tilt is really what protects our interests. And in this case, we have built, what you'd say, an alliance, partnership with countries that is not simply the United States. That is the line that China wants to project to ASEAN. that the Philippines is choosing US over China. But we have built stronger relationship with Japan, South Korea to the north of us. We have built relationship to the south of us, New Zealand and Australia, and even Canada and the United States becoming more active collectively. And this has been reflective on certain documents, cooperations that we have signed these past few years since we won our arbitral award. But those documents have evolved into actions. We call it the multilateral maritime cooperation activity that has gone really to the next higher level. And we see more military exercise, more joint activities with these countries, and now even European countries, and even India. I think we even had one where we participated on something that India organized. So this is what we're basically saying that the Philippines, though we're part of ASEAN, we see ourselves part of the broader Indo-Pacific because the Philippines really is not part of mainland ASEAN, where the most eastern part of it and the most northern part of it. We can understand where Indonesia is. That's understandable, given again their economy. When you look at their exports, mineral export is driven by investments from China. But on the part of the Philippines, our economy is more independent than the rest of ASEAN. We have stronger economic ties with Japan. People think it's really with the United States. No, with China, it's a misnomer. Just that we are
I'm
like the
glad
rest of
Yeah,
uh,
I'm glad you pointed that out because there is a common perception, and I'm not talking about, of course, the specialists who study ASEAN, but this is a common perception in the wider strategic community that ASEAN is so economically dependent on China that they obviously cannot really stand up, you know, against
yeah.
China. And then comes the case of Philippines, where you have gone on record so many times in your writings and in your speeches that actually you are not dependent on China. You took a conscious call to not get economically dependent on China. You have much deeper economic ties with countries like Japan. So yes, please elaborate on that a little bit. I
Yes,
mean, you
I'd like
yeah.
to share that. I mean, just like the rest of the world, of course, China has made us their markets. So to the point that maybe in the Philippines, our economic relationship is dumping products in the Philippines that has become uh, a source of data that would reflect strong trade ties. But that trade ties are not, you'd say, balanced as compared to our relationship with Japan, as compared to our relationship to the United States, as compared to our relationship with EU countries. Those are the top three economies that has really worked with the Philippines based on our own data. And in terms of investment, it's also reflective on the type of investments that we have gotten with Japan and even South Korea, really populating our economic zones. And the U.S. continue to be a big source of one of our industry, our service industry called the business process outsourcing that we learned from India. And that's why we become number two to these initiatives coming from India. And some of your companies are here for that purpose also. So it makes us more independent. Unlike the rest of Southeast Asia, their mineral exports goes to China. Their factories or manufacturing sectors have become part of the supply chain. On the part of the Philippines, our economy is driven differently. And that was one of the reasons why we were quite uh, serious when we studied and we also made that big leap of believing in international law because we believe that we are quite independent economically, that there will be no pressure. It worked for a while for with a new government that came in 2016, but as data showed, even 6 years of being friends with China simply contribute 0.9% of investment in the country, but our market was more open to China. So that means we were even in the losing side. It was not beneficial. As I always say, I add the word beneficial trade and investment partners of it. We're quite independent and we continue to grow more with other countries, and especially now that we are finalizing the European or EU FTA. So that kind of independent position makes the Philippines, again, some would say an outlier, maybe, but also gives the Philippines that option of building stronger relationship with countries that are like-minded, democratic, believers of the rules-based order, and the Philippines will continue to grow with these countries. And it was reflective really on the countries it visited, and even made a stand on because Just a few weeks back, July 10 or July 12, July 10 was 2 days before the actual 10 years of our victory in the arbitral. But on the last working day, different embassies, US, North America, North Asia, stood up with the Philippines. That we still continue to support the Philippines in their victory, and it's good now. It's even evolving into stronger economic ties, like the uh, Pax Silica, the former CHIPS Act. The U.S. has evolved into possible partnership that we can be part of the supply chain again, away from China, but part of countries that we work together. So it's basically reinforcing what we have done through decades, even before this maritime aggression coming from China since 2012.
Right, right. I'm glad you mentioned Pax Silica because I would have asked you about, first the bilaterals and then other multilateral, approaches such as the Pax Silica. I also looked up the critical mineral supply chains, etc. And I do see that with Japan, you have a very deep partnership on copper and many other critical minerals. When it comes to the EU, you've been mentioning Europe again and again, and Europe is extremely active now. The EU is active in the Indo-Pacific region, and Philippines is, of course, one of the key partners there. The US, how do you sort of distinguish between the kind of relationship, and this is like overall, I mean, economy, your defense, of course, with respect to the US, then with respect to Japan, the EU, and South Korea, because we do, I think, talk a lot about China, and somewhere we do not talk about these relationships enough.
With the US, of course, they are our treaty ally. We were a former colony of the United States after World War II, and but since then, they've also been one of the biggest investors year after year, decades after decades since our independence. And there is that affinity because a lot of Filipinos also became migrants to the US. We call them the Phil Americans. And that kind of people to people ties reinforces whatever happens in terms of the leadership of the political system of the US. But now, presidents after president, even with Trump, we continue to have strong defense ties, and it's reflective also on the military exercise that is part of our enhanced defense cooperation agreement with the U.S. We have seen it grow since 2016. It was signed 2013, but we have seen it grow to the point that just last April is the biggest among the military exercise. That means it's reflective of their commitment to our country. And we add even other countries that are north of us, I'm referring to Japan and South Korea. And now the Philippines trilateral with the United States and Japan has made us stronger in terms of economic ties that they would like to tie it up even to the Pax Silica that can help us become part of the supply chain. Our critical minerals, we are rich in nickel, copper, and chromite, so maybe we can learn from technology, work with companies from these countries, and help really extract these minerals, so we can have these critical minerals that could be the future of the global economy and even the AI and semiconductor. We play a very small part there, but we see that we can grow with these countries. And you have to accept also the role of Taiwan in this type of industry. And that kind of that kind of play from Taiwan is also good for us because number one, we are challenged by our northern neighbor and the part of Taiwan. They're our closest neighbor north of our northern islands. So it's something that we value to work with these countries, especially as the Philippines knows as one of our weaknesses really our manufacturing sector that's been weak for the past decade. So hopefully the security alliances can turn into strong economic partnership also. That's what we're hoping for
Right,
with Pax.
right. Yeah. And I have to, I'm tempted to ask you this follow-up question on to have your assessment on Mr. Donald Trump's impact on your relationship with the United States. The Donald Trump administration does not seem to give the same centrality to initiatives like the Quad, multilateral initiatives in the Indo-Pacific, like it did in the first term, etc. And we do see that there is the focus has shifted more to bilateral sort of ties.
Mm.
So, by and large, how would you assess the Trump effect on ASEAN and on Indo-Pacific? And what is
I think
it
on that,
signaling to China? And what is it signaling to China? I would like to ask you about this entire narrative of the G2. And I mean, how do you make sense of that? Because US is sitting right in the center of the crossfire.
yes. On ASEAN, of course, when you talk to friends, networks, and colleagues in ASEAN, everybody's irritated by this trade war. Again, this new news, no, that additional tariff will based on labor conditions, which even the Philippines got surprised because we have stricter labor rules in the country, so we don't know where it came from. But we've noticed that continues to be a challenge for ASEAN as a whole. I think what Trump is forcing everyone is to talk to them directly. So the first response of our government is to send a delegation. Because what happened in his first initiative on the so-called trade war, he slapped us with high tariffs, but his government exempted us on those that we exported. So it did not have an effect. It even had a positive effect on us because I think trade even went stronger in last year. So this one was quite a surprise. Where did this come from again? So I think what they want maybe is really to talk to them directly. So we're still on a wait and see. Hopefully, we will still get what we experienced last year. That in things that we export to the U.S., they exempt it. No? But again, our strongest relationship with the U.S. is really more of in-country investment and also the service sector, which is the business process outsourcing sector, that continues to be not affected by by all this Trump policy. On the defense side, more than other ASEAN, I think our as we have seen, really, we were the first visit of the Defense Secretary Hegseth in Asia when he got appointed after his confirmation, and we have seen how the U.S. Have really uh, continued to engage with the country to the point that we just had Secretary Rubio last week, and in a few weeks' time, I think will be having one of the undersecretaries of the United States. So a lot of engagement at the top level because a lot of these officials have been constant visitors in their different role, either think tanks or government official in previous administration. So that became quite valuable in the relationship also. And the U.S. Embassy and our Philippine embassy to the U.S. continues to be that link between the two. So we're just hoping that what's the surprise, which is just a few days back, is that again another round of tariffs. But we need to better understand it more because that will cause problems again for the U.S. It's affecting the reputation of the U.S. in the ASEAN. No? They've had problems already with the Gaza issue. That's why we have seen Muslim dominated countries in the ASEAN really losing trust and respect to the US, and more so now. So that's something to watch out for. And let's see if Trump will visit the region.
Okay.
With,
Let me connect. Yeah. Let me just connect because you did mention that loss of trust, right? And with whatever is happening in the Middle East right now, with what happened to the Gulf countries that were I mean, they hosted U.S. bases on their soils, and yet the U.S. was not really able to, protect them to. I mean, in whatever classical definition of a security provider. Okay. When we look at the South China Sea, when we look at West Philippine Sea and your region, of course, your most important defense partner is the United States. But how genuinely do you buy the argument that tomorrow, if push comes to shove, the United States would emerge or would sort of deliver on its security guarantor promise? Or do you think that internally the conversation is entirely changed? What is it like, Professor Manhit?
of course, there's still trust on our end. And as I've said, it's reflective on their actions here. Uh, it was us who really pushed down in terms of their presence here in the Philippines. And now we found a way that through visiting forces agreement, they can slowly build their capacity in this area. But part of the hedging of the Philippines, and I wrote about it when it was still not a policy, that maybe we have to broaden really our alliances. So not only work with the US, but work with its allies. That's why we have strengthened our position with Japan and South Korea or Republic of Korea. and also even Australia and New Zealand. And we're hoping really that beyond the EU, even the United Kingdom, some of these partners of the US, we can all together work because on the part of the Philippines, we have a role to play, ensure the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, especially as our victory has really stopped China from becoming more aggressive in island building from the rocks and the shoals. So we're hoping that should be a main motivator for the US to stick to their commitment.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally. Totally with you on that because that's exactly what I think India's reading of the strategic situation is also like, even though we do not have a treaty alliance with anybody. But I think by and large, what applies to the Indo Pacific stability is strong bilaterals, right? Right
yeah,
now, the need is like strong bilaterals, maybe smaller two, three groupings that can identify an issue and talk about it. I remember we had such lengthy conversations on middle power alignment,
yeah,
with the big daddy gone. So I think we spent so many days thinking about that. Yeah, but now we have to talk to you about India, and we have to talk about this recent uptick that happened a few years ago when we sold the BrahMos missiles to you.
yeah.
Please, could you and then you also deployed the BrahMos missiles at the Balikatan exercises that you recently held with the United States. Now, just a little bit on how you see the relationship with India strategically, economically, and also defense, because I think that's the core point
Yeah.
that sort of interests us both.
Yes, my understanding with our procurement of the Brahmos was really a strategic signal that the Philippines is willing to talk to countries to work with them in improving our capacity to deter aggression. So this was a procurement through our Navy or our Marines to be more specific, with the objective really that the Philippines is open to talk to other countries, like in this case, India. And just this year, I was even invited by your government. They had this India Philippines Defense Industry Delegation where
Yeah,
they had a
I would
conference.
I would have asked you a question on that. Yes, please tell me. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that surprised me. I got invited to be one of the guests, and I saw the response of our own military. As I've said, as you have introduced me, I'm an advisor of the our armed forces of the Philippines, multi-sector. That means we represent the private sector view, and I found it very positive when I saw this conference. And the following day, this delegation went to see our Secretary of Defense. It shows our openness to keep on working with countries that share our values. Now, in this case, as I've said, that's why it's a way to build our strategic partnership that was really started last year with the visit of the president. No? I remember there was an attempt to really strengthen India-Philippine relationship in this matter, but our former government, I'm referring to the previous government of Duterte,
Yeah,
avoided these discussions when he
yeah,
visited India as part of the ASEAN India gathering or meeting. He avoided, but this government saw it as an
yeah.
opportunity to really elevate.
So the previous government then, in that sense, was more, sort of keeping in mind, more sensitive to to China's perception of what
Yes,
it would
I
look
think that's
like.
how I
Yes,
read
yeah.
it because
And
I
I
knew the
remember,
meeting.
yeah, and I remember you being a very strong voice to sort of criticize that, and you have said it from multiple public forums that we should not give a damn to what China thinks. We should act in our
Yes,
national interest, right? Yeah,
yes. Because I remember that he went there. I know the topic of the ASEAN, but when he came back, he started talking about business process outsourcing industry. It was not really, and he was trying to deviate from the main reason why he took the trip with the rest of ASEAN. But at the end of the day, that's why I think a learning from the country is that though foreign policy is not key to any electoral victory in the country, the past few years we have made it more emotional issue that as we choose our leaders, we are a democracy, we are a presidential one-term presidency, so we'll be challenged on this again. I hope we have learned our mistake from 2016 when we simply set aside all these foreign policy and and defense policy commitments of candidates, but now we will put pressure that maybe we are on the right track with this government and who can continue this track of not only choosing between are you China or the US, but really broadening the capacity of the Philippines to engage, to have alliances, to have partnership with like-minded countries. That is key to our strong and independent foreign policy.
Right. And maybe just my last question to you, because we have discussed almost all relevant countries here, but I still have to discuss Russia because of course, one reason is because the BrahMos that we sold to you is co produced with Russia. That's one. And second is that you have a civil nuclear cooperation relationship with Russia. So, what is the development on that part? I mean, are you diversifying your civil nuclear cooperation with Rosatom, being underfinanced, or what is
Yeah.
the state like? Could
It's,
you help us understand? Yeah.
that one actually surprised me when it was announced. But as you dig deeper into it, these are simply engagement that but as you try to understand and relate it to other engagement, relationship on the nuclear front with other countries are more in advanced stage. I'm referring to, I think, France, the United States, uh, even Japan. That's why I think, in the Philippines, what is more acceptable to the population is small modular reactors.
Of
Given
course,
our
that's a big conversation in India as well. Yeah.
Yes. So whoever can provide that and can help us bring down the cost of energy, I think will be valued by the government. Right now, the United States, again, as I've said, and European countries are quite aggressive in sharing us that technology in some of the agreements that has been signed. I remember, I think a year and a half ago when we had a conference with countries participating, and Russia was not there. So I think Russia is in catch up on this issue. That's why they're offering, but not at the front stage like other countries.
All right, all right. And on that note, I have to thank you, Professor Victor Manhit, for taking the time, for speaking to us from your very busy schedule in Manila. You were watching Worldview with Swasti, and this was Professor Victor Manhit, who's the CEO and founder of Stratbase, one of the most well-known think tanks in Manila, and also a key strategic figure in Manila strategic circles. Thank you so much, Professor Manhit. Yeah.